Yo, welcome to the show. I'm Gunnar Olson here with a guy who's primed and ready to make this our first ever podcast where we have to put the explicit tag on.
Oh, we're doing it. We're really doing it this week.
We're doing it, Kyle Potter. It's time. No, I'm hoping that we don't have to, but some of these topics today I'm a little worked up about, and it's a little early in the morning for us, so we'll see what happens here. But I'll start with one that might work myself into a tizzy, but I need to find something out from you. Would you ever book a fare called Ultrabasic?
Absolutely not. What are airlines doing? It's just, basic economy isn't bad enough. You need to put ultra in front of it. What's next? Uber basic?
Yeah.
Horrible basic?
It's honestly, it's so ridiculous. But just for context, last year, WestJet started selling these fares that they call Ultra Basic, and they come with nothing. Just basically a guaranteed spot on the plane. It's not just a basic economy fare, like no seat assignment, no checked bags, no free changes. They also don't allow changes at all. And here's the kicker, not even a carry-on bag. So this fare essentially is as bare bones as it gets. You really hate to see it. I find these fares pretty gross.
Can you use the lavatory? Or have we tested? Do we need to do a review to figure out if they'll allow you to use a lavatory on an ultra basic fare?
Yeah, you have to bring your credit card and tap it to get entrance into the lavatory at the back of the plane. And the worst part about this is we've seen WestJet selling these before. On some of their sun routes where they have to compete with like Flair, the low cost carrier in Canada, to bring people to Punta Cana or Cabo. But we're seeing them now on the transborder flights. So we saw a few between the new route in Calgary and Minneapolis this week. We saw them between Vancouver and Atlanta, and they're selling them in the 100s round trip. So it's pretty eye catching. And we jumped on them right away and then started digging into what people actually get. And they're too nasty. They're too gross. We wouldn't even send them to our premium subscribers because this fare just comes with nothing. And I really hate this.
If you can count on the airlines for anything, it's to make things worse.
WestJet is taking the lead in the race to the bottom right now. Not good. Let's go on with the rest of the show, though, and see what else we hate today. But we're going to start with something great that we love. We have a mistake fare and a unicorn alert in the same week. That's going to be our something hot this week. We are also still somehow talking about Real ID this week on the show. And in our featured segment called The Extra Mile, we're going to chat about the state of travel demand in general and airfare. And we're going to tell you why we think it might be the best summer ever for your travels because of it.
Don't hate that.
No, we don't. Welcome back to the Thrifty Traveler Podcast. All right, let's jump into something hot and something cold this week where we look at the good and the bad news out there for travelers. And we're going to start with something scorching hot, Kyle. Tuesday morning, last Tuesday, our award analysts found one of the deals of the year, in my opinion. Cathay Pacific first class availability from JFK to Southeast Asia, New Zealand, and even Australia from 140,000 Cathay Pacific Asia miles each way, which definitely sounds like a lot, but for what you're getting, it's pretty spectacular. We saw Auckland, Bali, Bangkok, Brisbane, Ho Chi Minh City, Melbourne, Phuket, Singapore, and more. It was a crazy list of destinations flying one of the comfiest seats in the sky. What stuck out to you about this deal, Kyle?
Well, two things. First and foremost, Cathay Pacific first class is, generally speaking, very hard to book. It's gotten darn near impossible over the last couple of years. So just the fact that this popped up at all is noteworthy. The fact that it came from New York City, JFK. I mean, we haven't seen award availability to book Cathay Pacific first class all the way from New York City. I mean, that's like a 17-hour flight. Very hard to book. So the fact that that popped up was extraordinary, something we haven't seen literally in years. But the best wrinkle about this deal, and we really drilled down into it, is, it starts from New York City flying first class, but if you add a segment in business class, flying, onward from Hong Kong to Bali, to Bangkok, to Brisbane, to Ho Chi Minh, it actually got cheaper than the nonstop just in first class from New York City. So this is a what we call a mixed cabin segment, where just by adding in even a longer segment that should, in theory, increase the cost of this award, it actually got cheaper by, in some cases, as much as nearly 20,000 points each way. So while 140,000 points or more is pretty darn steep, This is as good as it gets to fly one of the best first class cabins in the sky, if that's on your list, and a pretty incredible deal all around.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty much a no-brainer for us to put the unicorn alert designation on this one. It was just such a spectacular deal, and the kind of deal that I wish I had been ready to book. But alas, a lot of premium subscribers got to do it instead. So, but our week wasn't over, because then on Friday, our team dug up a good old-fashioned mistake fare, Kyle. Lufthansa business class to Europe, starting at just $1,000 round trip. Pretty ridiculous. Flying from Philly, Miami, Dallas, and Charlotte to cities all over Europe, like Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Milan, Rome, Stockholm, and more. The highest fare on the deal was right around $1,480, and the lowest one was right around $1,000. And the crazy part is it included August on many routes. August had the best availability in some cases, meaning that these fares were probably cheaper than economy. Some people on those planes were paying more for their economy seat than our subscribers will for business class. But was this a true mistake fare? What happened here?
I don't know. Let's put it this way. We're now, 5 days past this. And as we're talking about this fare, it hasn't been canceled. So that's a great sign. But we also dug into the mechanics of how this fare was composed. So, while you see a great price and it's $1,000, there's a lot more to airfare than just one round figure. There's fees and surcharges and taxes, and then the actual airfare itself. And it all kind of rounds in together into the big price, or in this case, the not so big price that you ultimately see. There was nothing in there when we actually dug into the details that screams, oh, somebody screwed something up here. There are some cases where clearly the airline, maybe inadvertently, in some cases purposely, left out a fuel surcharge, and that results in the fare being $800, $1,200, even $2,000 cheaper than it normally would be. And there was none of that in this case. So, you put these two together, this mistake fare, maybe not mistake fare, the unicorn fare flying Cathay Pacific first class earlier last week. And it just feels like something has shifted. And that's why we're going to talk about exactly what is happening, what is going on in the world of travel, that travel demand is apparently slipping, and what that means for people. And because, the long and short of it is, if you want to stop the podcast here, which please don't, but okay, this is an opportunity. The fact that we're seeing, Cathay Pacific first class for the first time in years, from New York City, the fact that airlines may have intentionally sold a round-trip business class fare to Europe, including in the summer, for just over $1,000 round trip, that says something about where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can't wait to dig into it a little later in the pod. But first, we have to pivot to something cold, and something that is ice cold right now, Kyle. A short 23 and a half years after 9/11, TSA Real ID is going into effect on May 7th. That means travelers are going to have a Real ID or their passport to get through airport security. And they really took their time with this 2-decade rollout. So we've got all the details buttoned up, right, Kyle? We know exactly what to expect May 7th?
It's going to be a mess May 7th. But let's stress, after being, the butt of every single joke for the last basically 2 decades of delay after delay, extension after extension, we're now less than a month out from when this goes live. And by all accounts, this is actually happening. We're not making things up anymore. We're not waiting for that 11th hour extension. Is it possible? Sure, it is. But this is the closest that we've ever been to Real ID actually taking effect for domestic flights, where you're going to need one of these compliant, driver's licenses, a passport, global entry card, which is what I plan to use. That's an approved alternative. This is going to happen, and people need to start preparing for it. And in many cases, it is way too late to get a new Real ID. So if you have a passport that you're willing to travel with on your next domestic flight, or you have a global entry card, throw it in your wallet now, throw it in your backpack, because by the looks of it, you're going to need it.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping that this doesn't come back to bite me, and we're not doing this segment again in April 2026.
It would be so classic, though. We're just tempting fate at this point.
Yeah, but I just think the messaging around this, because they've delayed it so many times, that people just aren't taking this seriously. And I think once we see some reports of people being denied boarding or being, screened long extra than they should be. People getting hung up at TSA checkpoints because they don't have a real ID. I think once people see that these issues are happening, then maybe they'll finally convert over to real ID themselves. I'm on my second real ID now, so I'm uber compliant here, and I'm nearing my third, I think. So, but that's something cold this week. Anything else on real ID?
It's just hard to imagine how this could have been bungled more, where, they get to a deadline and then they realize that there's not enough people that have a real ID. And so they extend it, but then that removes the urgency. And then, the American traveling public as a whole, I think rightfully has just kind of said, like, this is never going to happen. And so it's just been this vicious cycle of there not being enough urgency to convince people that this is happening and they need to get ready for it. And so to me, part of the problem has less to do with, how many people have a real ID or an alternative ready to travel. It's that people aren't going to be conditioned to have those IDs with them the next time they go to the airport starting May 7th and onwards. To say nothing of the fact that on the one hand, the TSA has said you need an approved ID or you will not be allowed into the airport. But then in the very next sentence, they say travelers without an approved ID may face delays or additional screening. It's like, which one is it? Let's level with the American public here. I understand what they're trying to do and trying to make sure that they don't have to turn away people, but still kind of create that additional sense of urgency and importance that this is real, that people need a real ID. But man, this 2-decade-long saga, at a certain point, it just needs to be over, right?
Yeah, it has to be over. This is it's getting kind of ridiculous, and frankly, I'm tired of talking about it. So let's move on to our extra mile topic this week, where we dig into something a little extra into the world of travel. And this one's a big one. We touched on it a little bit in something hot, but the state of travel demand, basically travel demand is way down right now. And the airlines have taken notice. They appear to be freaking out a little bit about travel demand. And we saw this start to manifest itself in some really low fares over the last few months that we've been sending to our premium members. And then we got some data that airfare fell in February 4%, and then in March it fell another 5.3%. The biggest 2-month drop that we've seen in a long time. And basically, the airlines are starting to react to this demand environment. What are you seeing?
I think it's time to pull out my favorite meme, my favorite GIF of all time, which is it's a husky in a spacesuit floating in outer space, just kind of flapping his drummies, and it just says, "I have no idea what I'm doing." Because I feel like this is where everybody is at right now. Us in this room trying to read the tea leaves, airlines trying to feel their way through this moment of uncertainty and travel demand slipping. It's a weird point, and it's a weird point in large part because, we've really had, since the depths of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, when everything ground to a screeching halt. Ever since then, it has been 5+ years of just uninterrupted travel growth. Every single year was bigger than the last in terms of travel demand, especially here in the United States, but across the globe as well. I mean, here in the U.S., all 10 of the 10 busiest travel days in our country's history fell within 2024. Travel demand just couldn't stop. But I mean, this is the thing, and this is what we've talked about, for years now. This couldn't last forever. Travel demand wasn't just going to be a slow but steady line up forever. At some point, things were going to turn. And what has become clear is that, at some point in early 2025, we hit a turning point where, that steady growth in travel demand started to turn the other way. And that's what we're dealing with now. And that's what we're trying to figure out. What is going on? How airlines are going to cope with this, but most importantly, what that's going to mean for travelers. Because while, there is a lot of anxiety out there about the economy, and especially after what's been going on with the stock market, people are, rightfully very concerned. But this isn't going to be necessarily bad news for travelers. On the contrary, I think it's going to lead to some more opportunities.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be opportunities out there. I do wonder, and this is based in absolutely nothing, so solid podcasting here.
You heard it here first.
But I think after the pandemic, we saw a lot of people traveling what I would call aggressively, people who were really pent up, right? We were all stuck and we wanted to get back out there. And the phrase revenge travel was something that was coined then.
Right.
Aggressive and revenge travel. It really makes travel seem really high stakes. Eh?
You're leaning into the hate today, Gunnar.
Yeah. It's the haters episode of the Thrifty Traveler podcast. But I think people probably got those huge trips that they've been waiting on forever out of their system. Or maybe they're just out of points and miles that they accrued over the course of 3 years and they spent them all on these big, massive trips, whether it was a Europe trip or an Asia trip. Everybody went to Tokyo last year. And, after big trips like that, maybe people are pumping the brakes a little bit. But like you said, there's just so much opportunity out there right now if you do still have some points and miles or even some cash ready to travel. But what else are you seeing out there in terms of how the numbers are showing what's going on here?
It's all over the place. There have been warning signs that have been growing a little bit louder and louder over the course of the last, I would say, month or so. So, in early March, a handful of airlines started saying, things have really started to slow down. And there was a question of whether that was, holding up your hands, the economy, what's going on here, versus, some lingering concerns about the safety of travel, after, not one, but two crashes, one of which horrific fatal incident just outside of Washington, D.C. And then soon after that, the crash of a Delta regional jet in Toronto. And, whether or not that's a contributing factor here, I don't think anybody knows for sure. But what I think we do know is that this is bigger than just, the recent wobbles on the stock market, that this is bigger, certainly, than just concerns about, aviation safety, that something has really turned, that, airlines in Canada and online travel agencies have said that bookings from Canada to the United States in particular are down. There's a handful of different data points that show that, some really severe, others a little bit more moderate, but still the trend line is pretty clear. You see it, Virgin Atlantic came out a while ago and said that, bookings between the US and Europe are down overall, trending the wrong way. And yet in the next breath, a handful of days later, Delta said transatlantic bookings are outpacing 2024, and that, spring and summer and even into fall is shaping up to be really huge. So again, you just come back to, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. And that's the thing, is that we're just at this massive point of uncertainty of exactly what's going on and how long this is going to go on. But, we've seen, most importantly, predating all of this stuff, before people start traveling less, before airlines warn investors that things aren't panning out exactly the way that they thought they would this year, they start to try to fill seats that are suddenly going out empty, which means that they start slashing prices. And that's what we have been seeing for months, and which is why I think we're both, on the one hand, cautious and definitely uncertain about where this is heading or how long this is going to last. But on the other hand, feeling pretty hopeful that this is going to result in some of the deals that travelers really love. But before we get into that, let's take a quick break. It's time for a word from our sponsors, and that sponsor is us. We've said it before, but I want to say it again. If you want flight deals, you need Thrifty Traveler Premium. 24/7, 365, our team of awesome flight deal analysts is digging up the cheapest fares and hard-to-book points deals, sending them to members' inboxes daily. And as you've heard, those deals are only getting better. Gunnar, what's your favorite?
My favorite right now, I'm kind of obsessed with this New York City to Milan Emirates business class deal. I've talked about it on, I think, 3 out of our 6 episodes so far. But I can't get over the value here. 108,000 Emirates Skywards miles round trip from New York City to Milan. That's business class. You could also get this in first class. And this availability that we sent just yesterday included the Olympics in Milan.
So, amazing.
Ridiculous deal. I'm kind of desperate to book it myself, but I'm going to have to run home and ask the wife about that one. But we've seen a ton of incredible stuff. Iceland, peak summer under $599 round trip. A lot of Iceland Air on there, but a lot of Delta on there. Delta is getting really competitive on those routes and matching some of those. We saw some Australia business class availability over the last week. Business class on Qantas DFW to Australia for 127,000 miles each way. Pretty spectacular there. And then, besides obviously the mistake fare and the unicorns, we're seeing stuff like Costa Rica and Belize under $399 round trip. We're seeing New York City to Santorini for $583 round trip, and a Delta One Suites deal to Seoul from 110,000 Sky Miles each way, which is pretty spectacular. When you can book Sky Miles deals one way, we always make sure that we can send them to our members. So lots to love in your inbox this week for premium members.
You can get all that and more. Sign up today at thriftytraveler.com/premium. As a special treat, our podcast listeners can use the promo code TTPOD for $20 off your first year of flight deal alerts. That's thriftytraveler.com/premium. Enter the promo code TTPOD, 5 letters, all one word, for $20 off your first year.
All right, so let's get to the fun part here about this travel demand discussion.
We're done hating for today.
We're done hating. Well, possibly done hating.
We'll see.
But for this second part of the extra mile, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in airfare and the opportunity that's coming out of this. We always harp on it on our website and whenever we discuss airfare, but all this stuff is about supply and demand. It's extremely simple. You don't need me to explain to you what supply and demand is. But we've seen for a few years now that airlines have been throwing capacity at travel. So they're putting as many airplane seats in front of travelers as possible so they can be the ones to take them to where they want to go. And what that's led to is either sometimes it's matching demand and keeping up with it, and the airlines are turning great profits like they did a few summers ago, or it's last summer where there was way too much supply, there was way too much overcapacity, and the demand wasn't there, and we saw some really incredible deals. What we're seeing again this year is that they got the capacity wrong a little bit here, and right now airlines are cutting capacity to make up for this mistake. Right, they overshot, but these cuts, we're seeing them starting late this fall and into 2026. The cuts have not started yet, and that's why we're seeing really good fares right now and really good award availability through summer this year. So what else are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear that I don't know it's so much that airlines got it wrong. It's that the demand environment changed and kind of caught airlines off guard. And so airlines that were banking on the biggest summer of travel yet, that 2025 was going to outpace 2024, all of a sudden there are these warning signs that, this year isn't going to pan out the way that airlines thought they would. And they need to respond by reducing supply. If demand isn't coming in high enough to fill planes at high fares, they are going to cut. And that's what they've said they're going to do. Delta is the first major US airline to come out with earnings, and they've already said that, starting basically mid-August and onward, they're going to start cutting flights. We don't know exactly where. We don't know exactly how many flights they might cut, but we do know that some cuts are coming, and I'm sure Delta is not going to be the last airline to do this. We're already seeing airlines across the board, especially internationally, start to tweak things a little bit to make sure that they aren't, flying too many seats in some of the markets that apparently are not as strong as airlines were banking on them being. But again, like you said, these cuts aren't happening overnight. It's going to take some time for the system to kind of readjust to the new demand environment. And by the way, this demand environment is going to keep changing because nobody knows how long this is going to go. Is this, the start of a recession? We don't know. Are we already in a recession? I certainly don't know. I don't know anything about economics, but I do know that something is changing out there and that, airlines are starting to respond, but they cannot respond fast enough to prevent what we love, what we're all about, which we certainly don't hate, which is great deals. So Gunnar, walk through, we've touched on a few of them already, but I just feel like there are so many examples that started cropping up, as early as, late January, early February, of flight deals that are close to, if not on par with some of the craziness we saw in the early stages of the pandemic when travel demand started to disappear.
Yeah, I'll touch on a few deals, but one interesting thing that we noted on our website this week was that usually around this time of year, March, April, May, fares are the highest they are all year, right before summer. The travel season usually demands a lot of money from people if you want to be traveling in those June, July months. And that's kind of right when people start to look at booking those things. So usually we see this big spike right in March and April for airfare for the whole year. And this year we saw a drop. It's going to change the way that graph looks. And it's the only year besides 2020 where that graph just kind of got inverted. So we're seeing just a ton of opportunity. And I think a lot of the reason is, especially for US travels, because these domestic flights are so cheap right now.
Right.
We're seeing kind of this big resurgence of sub $100 domestic round trip flights. We love those flights. That's actually how I found Thrifty Traveler a long time ago, was you guys were posting about $96 round trip flights to Denver. And I thought there's no way I could go skiing for $96. And when I looked into it, it was true. So that's what got me hooked on Thrifty Traveler way back.
You spent $96 to fly to Denver and then paid $496 for a lift ticket.
Yeah. And $45 for chicken tendies at the Mid Lodge midday.
Gunnar, we're here to help.
But yeah, so these domestic flights are definitely taking this average and dropping it way down, right? And wherever you want to go, whether it's down to Florida for one last sunny getaway, or out to the mountains, or anywhere, just your cousin's wedding in Kansas City, everything is looking a lot cheaper right now, especially for these spring and summer dates.
Let's pause and remind people that this is the trend. This does not mean that every single domestic flight you're going to look at is going to be dirt cheap. I think in particular, if you're looking within the next 30 days, airfare still tends to be pretty high across the board, no matter where you're going. But, the fact that average flight prices are dropping and it coincides with this overall trend, what this means is that, the flight deals, whether it's domestic and some of the other regions we're going to get into, the great flight deals, the things that we really care about, are easier to find than they were even a couple of months ago. I mean, Peter Thornton on our team said last week was probably the single best week of flight deals that he's seen in the 3 years and change that he's worked with us. I mean, again, that says something about the environment we're in right now.
Yeah, Peter is running out of emojis on the premium team right now. We're having trouble explaining to people the urgency and how good some of these deals are, but good problem to have. Another really interesting trend that we've been seeing for a while now, and then Delta came right out and said it. But Kyle, you and I looked at each other funny when they said it, but on their earnings call, Delta basically told everybody that August in their book is no longer summer. So if your summer feels too short this year, call Ed Bastian. Bastian shortened summer. But basically they're just not seeing the demand there anymore. And the reason is schools go back to school a lot earlier down south, where a lot of Delta's customers are. So they're kind of losing out on those last few weeks of August. Up here in the north, school goes back to school way too early, obviously, for most people. But at least, you get that last trip in mid-August that you can take for cheap. But right now, these flights to Europe in the 400s and 500s round trip in August are being priced like they're in the middle of October, like they're in the middle of the school year.
It's pretty crazy. And on the one hand, you and I were both shocked when Glenn Howenstein, Delta's president, said, quote, "August is no longer a peak month for Delta's travel," and then explained that they would start kind of trimming flights from their schedule from mid-August and onward. And that's crazy to hear, because August is typically, while it's the end of the peak summer travel, it's still pretty squarely peak summer, when you can expect things are at their busiest, prices are at their highest on everything from flights to hotels, and in some cases meals, where you can end up getting charged more because you end up in the wrong place and it's too busy. But on the other hand, I think it clicked pretty soon after that's like, well, no, you know what? The amount of flight deals that we've sent that a year ago, traveling in any time before, basically after Labor Day in early September, would result in paying hundreds of dollars more. I mean, the volume of flight deals to Europe in particular, where you can, depart from the US August 14th, in some cases even like August 7th. And still get a huge bargain at some of the lowest prices that we see, is unprecedented, I think. And most importantly, is an opportunity for families out there who are tethered to the school schedule to pull off a big summer trip before getting the kids back to school, and do it without breaking the bank.
Yeah, if you're looking to take one of those big summer trips to Europe, and you searched for, July 12th through July 19th, and you saw something that was close to $2,000 round trip in economy, don't slam the laptop. Don't give up. Just take a look at the beginning of August, because you might be surprised at what you're seeing. We definitely are. It's a trend that we love to see, though, because a summer trip to Europe, if you can pull it off, pretty spectacular at that number. We're seeing it manifest in other ways, though, too. Obviously, when flights are going out empty, the airlines are releasing a lot of award space to help fill those seats, especially up front. Usually business class seats are a little easier to book in the summer anyway, because there are fewer business travelers that time of year. We don't know exactly what the state of business travel demand is right now. The airlines seem a little worried about it. But this unicorn deal, the Cathay first class deal from New York City, is definitely a result of this travel demand environment, you'd have to think. Same thing with the Qantas business class stuff to Australia.
It's absolutely a sign of the times, and that something has truly shifted. The trend over the last 2 years has been really clear, that as travel demand was so high and only kept growing, and that there are more people than ever that either have a ton of money saved up and want to book a business class fare for themselves, or have gotten into the world of points and miles and can book these seats using their credit card points or airline miles. That those groups of people are bigger than ever, and airlines don't want to allow people to redeem miles if they don't have to. If they have a choice between letting somebody book for 85,000 points for a flight from Chicago to London or charging $3,000 for that same seat, they are going to charge $3,000. And that is what they have been doing, because the demand is there to support it. And what seems like it's shifted is that it's kind of starting to flip on its head, that, as demand softens, as there are fewer people who are, willing to pay those prices for those big trips, or, maybe people are just more prone to staying at home. I don't know. Again, I have no idea what I'm doing. But when we see, Cathay Pacific first class availability from New York City to Hong Kong for the first time in literally years, when we see Qantas business class for those long flights to Australia bookable from Dallas for the first time in at least a year, if not a little bit more, that says something about where travel demand is at, and therefore where the opportunities lie for travelers, because it's starting to feel like there are more of those opportunities than we've seen in at least a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had one major takeaway from this whole discussion that I'd want to share with our listeners, and that we've been sharing with our Thrifty Traveler Premium subscribers, it's that the getting is going to be really good in the short term, but we have to be booking now. I think, we're looking at how the airlines are reacting to this, and they're right-sizing their operations. They're figuring all this stuff out. The more data they get, the more they're going to be able to charge appropriate fares for these flights that we want to take. We love the inappropriate fares that are way too slow or way too low.
There's our poll quote.
And basically, we're trying to get our travelers into those fares that are priced too low. And right now, over the next few months, we're going to see so much of it, and we're on the hunt for it every day. But whether it's these domestic flights that are under $100, under $200 round trip to all these places that you already want to go or need to go. Obviously, these Canada flight deals that we've seen lately have been pretty amazing, and I took one myself. But there's just such great opportunity to go to Banff, to go to Vancouver, to go up to Montreal or Toronto this year, if Canada has been on your list. We already talked about this August kind of loophole. If you want to go to Europe, that's just an unbelievable opportunity, especially if you're dead set on paying cash and flying economy. That's absolutely where you should be looking. But where else should you look, Kyle?
I mean, we've certainly seen a resurgence within the last few just weeks in, cheap flights to Asia, including Japan, which, we've touched on in previous episodes, just how sky high travel demand is to Japan. And so the fact that we're now seeing fares in some cases, not just in the 700s, but in the 600s round trip from cities across the country, again, is I think pretty telling about how things are changing. The amount of award space that we've seen on routes, again, that, for years were very difficult, if not impossible, to book. says something about what's happening and what kind of opportunity we're in. I do want to say though, this is an opportunity, but I think it really hinges on two things. That it depends on how deep this goes, this economic uncertainty that we're all kind of feeling our way through right now, and if things really do fall off a cliff, which I want to stress has not happened yet. This pales in comparison to what we saw in March and April of 2020. But if it continues to decline or declines more precipitously, we're talking about much bigger changes in how airlines fly and what kind of capacity is out there and who's traveling, and therefore kind of what that does to the airfare pricing or the points market out there. And, longer term, it kind of doesn't matter what happens with that, because budget airlines like Spirit, Frontier, to a certain extent, even Southwest, are really, really struggling right now. And particularly when you talk about the domestic market, but even, flying down to the Caribbean or Mexico or up to Canada, these airlines are really, really important for driving those domestic flight prices down. And if they continue to struggle, and I don't see how all of them make their way out of this and still function as very healthy airlines, because the fact of the matter is basically none of them are right now. But if that continues, I think it spells some major trouble for what the domestic airfare environment looks like through the end of this year and into 2026.
Yeah, the health of the budget airlines is so important. And I know I spent the first segment of this show dunking on WestJet for offering a ultra low cost fare that I really hate. And I don't book those fares. And I know a lot of people out there saying, who cares if Spirit or Frontier dies? Let them die. The health of these airlines is so important for the fares that you pay to fly American, Delta, and United. It's crucial. They're driving the market in so many ways, and we need those airlines to exist so that we can pay reasonable fares for the airlines that we actually want to fly. So never root for a budget airline to fail. And in fact, I'm really rooting for them all to succeed and hope that they can figure some things out, because when they're able to offer low fares against these airlines that we already want to fly, it's always good news for us.
The airlines want nothing more than to charge you more money. That is what airlines exist for, is to make money. They are, most of them, publicly traded for-profit companies. They exist to make more money and reward their shareholders, which means that they want to charge higher fares. And having pressure from airlines like Spirit and Frontier and Sun Country and Southwest is what drives those prices down, no matter what airline you're flying.
Awesome. Let's talk about our listeners. Our listener question of the week, we want to help listener Tara Z, who writes, I'm trying to redeem rewards points for business class tickets to Kenya. We're going to exclude her exact dates, but let's just say they're in late November, early December. She says, we're flexible about the dates we travel in order to redeem and accomplish this. However, I'm having no luck finding anything that is going to work that doesn't include insane taxes, Emirates, or 700K plus in points. Any suggestions? Anything for Tara here, Kyle?
I mean, Emirates is tough. That is a natural starting point for anybody looking to get to the Middle East or Africa. But anytime you have to go through Dubai, you're going to get hit with some nasty, nasty taxes and fees. So definitely steer clear of that. The first thing that came to mind for me is flying Ethiopian, which is, Africa's one of, if not the largest airline in Africa. And they have a ton of flights, not just to their hub in Addis Ababa, which puts you pretty close to Kenya, but they also fly nonstop to Togo, in Lomé, and a handful of other destinations from airports across the country. And generally speaking, the award availability is pretty good. So if you focus less on getting straight to Kenya and more to getting to the continent of Africa, and then hopping on another, relatively cheap 1 to 3 hour flight to get to your final destination, I think that's the way to do it. I just looked earlier today. You can fly from Washington, D.C., Dulles to Lomé in Togo for 130 miles and $137. 130,000 miles, 130 miles. Tara, do we have a bargain for you? No, 130,000 miles and $137 round trip by booking through ANA Mileage Plan, the Japanese airline, to which you can transfer points from American Express. So if you have points saved up from an American Express Gold or Platinum card, you transfer them to ANA. Those transfers typically take anywhere between 24 to 72 hours. But there's generally speaking a lot of award space on Ethiopian on those many flights to and from the U.S. So that's probably my starting point. What do you have for Tara?
Yeah, when I flew back from Kenya after my honeymoon, we flew Turkish. The Istanbul or the Nairobi to Istanbul leg wasn't the fanciest seat. It's a 222, and they technically called it an angled flat, although I could not tell the difference if it wasn't lie flat. But that flight did depart at 4 a.m., which is a little rough to connect into the bank going back to the U.S. Navigating the Nairobi airport at 2 in the morning, probably wouldn't recommend that. But it was a pretty cheap redemption. We booked it through Life Miles, which is how my name ended up 3 times on my boarding pass. A story for another day. We don't have time for that.
Gunnar, Olson, struggling through the Nairobi airport. I would pay good money to see that.
Oh, I did pay good money to get out of that conundrum. But if my recommendation to you, Tara, if you can't find a good option, I'd recommend booking a refundable or award flight in economy or premium economy to take your trip. And then I would roll the dice on finding some last minute business availability. This is something I've had some success with, and not everybody loves this strategy because it is a bit of gambling. But I do. It basically ensures that you're going to be able to take your trip no matter what in economy or premium economy. And then in the few weeks before your trip, look for that last minute business class availability because it does pop up on airlines that you actually do want to fly. So just stay on it, but make sure you have something booked so you at least know you're taking your trip. And if you have to gut it out in economy, you'll have to gut it out in economy. But at least you got to go to Kenya, and I couldn't recommend it more. Anything else for Tara?
No, book if you're going to kind of take that gamble and book economy and hope that something opens up as your trip draws closer, just booking that initial economy flight with miles is so important, because then you don't have to worry about, getting a voucher from the airline if you book with cash. In most cases, most airlines, especially the big U.S. airlines, but increasingly some of the big foreign airline programs that we know and love and use a lot, charge either reasonable cancellation fees to cancel that flight and then rebook something in business class if that opens up, or they don't charge anything at all. So, kind of keeping your options open, making sure you can make that trip happen while hoping that something a little bit better in business class opens up is a great way to make sure you can take this trip.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kyle, we never planned to have this segment, but a listener forced our hand. So we're going to award the first ever Listener of the Week of the Thrifty Traveler podcast. So in episode 4, the hotels episode, where Kyle tried to convert me from Hyatt to Hilton, in that episode, I forced a really cringy pool metaphor that kind of took on a life of its own over the course of the podcast. And in the listener question section, I promised extra points for anyone who left a review continuing on this pool metaphor without explaining what extra points were. But our listener, Rosie C., delivered, and she's getting extra points as our first ever Listener of the Week. Rosie's review is, I love this podcast. It's like diving into the deep end of Points and Miles, but with floaties. The hosts are down to earth, funny, and share realistic travel stories that actually feel doable. It's the perfect poolside listen, entertaining, informative, and no risk of drowning in complicated jargon. Highly recommend if you want to laugh while leveling up your travel game. First of all, way too kind, Rosie. Thank you so much. But also your continuation of our metaphor was just perfect.
There's understanding the assignment, and then there's what Rosie did. Also, her review is titled, quote, Making a Splash in Travel Hacks. So, Rosie, you took our pained, cringy metaphors and brought them to a new level. So enjoy your extra points, which are worthless and can't be redeemed anywhere, but you'll love them all the same.
Exactly. Rosie, you're the best. Thank you so much. You're the recipient of our first ever Listener of the Week of the Thrifty Traveler podcast. If you want us to answer your question, email us at podcast@thriftytraveler.com, and we might feature it on next week's show as well. And to close the show, like always, we're going to do On the Spot, and it's my turn to put Kyle on the spot this week. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. It is the haters episode after all. Kyle, what destination would you not go back to that you've visited?
I don't know that there's anywhere that I've been where I say I'm never going back there. I'm lucky in that regard. There are, however, a handful of destinations that I would be just fine not going to again. And the first one that comes to mind is Dubai. I'm very glad we went. We fitted into, a big trip that we took a few years ago, going to Turkey and Oman, and then stopped for a few days in Dubai before making our way back to the States. Saw some cool things, but Dubai just doesn't grab me in that way. It just didn't do anything special for me in the same way that even Oman, just an hour or so flight away did. So that's not to rip on anybody who's got Dubai on their wish list. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum here, but Dubai just, all the glitz and the glam and the obscene amount of real estate development that seems to be driving that entire economy. It's just, it just didn't catch me in the way that it does some other people.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a full-on hater's guide to Dubai. It's more, destination you wouldn't go back to could also mean I've seen it, I get it, I'm glad I went kind of thing. But that's a good one. All right. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrifty Traveler podcast. If you would rate us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice, it would be a huge help to us. Also, like and subscribe to Thrifty Traveler on YouTube, where you can watch these episodes if you so dare. And send this episode to someone you know who needs a vacation. Let's try and spread the word about this great show here. And if you have feedback for us, send me a note at podcast@thriftytraveler.com. We would love to hear from you. Kyle, tell us about the TT Podcast team.
This episode was produced by our co-founder, Nick Serati, and the guy to my right, Gunnar, Olson. It was edited by David Strutt. Our theme music is by Benjamin Tissot. See you next week.
See ya.